Hey guys, in this video, we will continue our path towards creating a full CRUD application in PHP. And today we will be looking at how we can go about seeing records that have been submitted to the database. By way of recap, we would have created a database called Attendance DB. And inside of Attendance DB, we have a table called attendee, which is where our records for each attendee will be stored, meaning each person who registers on this page should get stored in this database once they click submit. Now, to accomplish this, what I'm going to do is add a nav bar to the top of this page, which will allow me to navigate to another page to view all the records. So I'm going to go to bootstrap.com and see what they have in store for me for nav bars. So I go to getbootstrap.com and I go to components in their documentation and navbar. And here I see some sample code for a navbar. And if I scroll by, I can see the different options available to me. So I'm going to go with this navbar. I like the way it looks. It's simple enough and the code looks simple enough to understand. So I'm just going to copy it. And because this is a navbar that I want to show up on every single page in this application, I'm going to add it to the header file in my project. So remember that header should be above everything, and whatever goes in the header file means that it's at the top of the page. It's at the top of any HTML document that gets rendered. So if I add the navbar here, the expectation is that every page that includes header will have the navbar being displayed. So I just fixed my indentation, and then we're just going to go back to the documentation on the site and dissect it a bit. So you see here that they're opening a tag called nav, and we have a few classes that kind of give it some character. And we have bg-light, so that means we can change what color scheme we want. We can look at that later. And then we see that they have a navbar-brand, which is the word navbar, so we can change that. So I'm going to go back and change that in my code from navbar to IT conference. All right. And so usually this is the name of your site, right? So similarly, they would have used the same code in their site, and instead of using a word, they use their logo. So whatever website you're building, you can put the logo in this section or just the word of the name of the website. Now, this section with the button, what it does is create those navbar pills. So if I reduce this in size to the size of maybe a mobile device, then you see this happening here, and that's what we usually see on a mobile phone. So by using Bootstrap, we have already gotten what we call a responsive website, and so that bit of code there for the button, it actually is responsible for making the navbar pills. That's what they are called. All right, and then moving on, this div, which is collapsible. So you see that it says collapse. So if you take out these classes, I'm sure, I can guarantee you that if you modify these class references as they're here in the example, their navbar will not behave the way Bootstrap would have intended it to. So I advise you, if you're going to make changes to these classes, be very careful, and you should be very, very deliberate. So this section houses all of the links, and you see that they're just regular anchor tags. So there's nothing really fancy about them. So all we need to do is change the name that is being displayed, the name of the link, and also the href. So we're going to do that quickly with our website. So right now we will have, well, we have one page, but by the end of this video, we should have at least two. So I'm going to leave two here, and I'll leave this as home because home is akin to index. So I'll leave that there. And the href will be index.php. So anytime somebody clicks the home link in the navbar, it should go to index.php. And in addition to that, I'm going to use the same link inside of this anchor tag for the logo or the branding section, right? The navbar brand. So you notice that this is also an anchor tag. So if we go back to Bootstrap, their logo is actually clickable. If I click this logo, it goes back to their home page. So that is the kind of behavior I want. Similarly, there's a home button. So my navbar will have IT conference, which if clicked will reload index, and also a link that says home, which when clicked will reload the index page. And then my next page, I'm going to make it say view attendees. So the expectation is that when I click this navbar link, I am going to see all of the persons who will be attending my conference. And since I'm here, I'll just say that the href should be view records.php. So that means I need to create a page for this anchor tag to navigate to. So I'm going to go back to my Explorer pane, and I have index, I have success PHP. I'm just going to add a new file, and I'm going to call this one view records.php. And now we have a new blank file. And then, of course, the first thing that we want to do, and I'm just going to go back to index and kind of borrow the code from here. I want it to look uniform, so I'm just going to include the header and the connection. And I'm also going to include my footer, as well as some BR tags to put some distance between the content and the footer. All right, so once we have done those changes, we can go ahead and refresh our page, and we see that now we have a nav bar. And because it's using the light theme, I don't know if it's very visible for you, so we can change that. But the fact is we have the nav bar showing, and then if we click this, it reloads the home page. If we click home, it's the same thing. If we click view attendees, then we navigate away, and you see that the nav bar is still in place. So looking at these examples, I can see that I have navbar dash dark, and bg dash primary. So I'm going to go back to my navbar code in header, and I'm going to make a few modifications. So I'm going to say navbar dash dark and bg dash primary. And that's because I want my navbar to be blue. So when I refresh my page, I get my navbar being blue and my links clearly visible. So now that we have created our new page, we need to change the title so that the correct title will appear in our title bar in our browser. But the next big step is to modify our CRUD file so that we can start interacting with the data the way we intend to for this page. Now for this page, we are going to be working on the R out of CRUD. So remember, CRUD is create, read, update, delete. When you're viewing files, you're reading or retrieving the files. So I can go to the CRUD, and I'm going to the CRUD file, and then we're going to define a brand new function. So we already have a function that is dealing with inserting data. I'm going to create another function. So I'm going to follow the same pattern, public function, and then we will say get attendees. So your function name should always be kind of indicative of what is happening. So I'm actually going to qualify this one. It's really insert attendees, so that nobody would ever wonder, oh, what am I inserting when they see this function. So if I change the function name here, then I need to make sure that all references to this function are changed also. So I'll just quickly hop over to my success page, which is where I made reference to it, and change it from insert to insert attendees. All right. So back to our CRUD page, we are defining a function that says get attendees. And then inside this function, I am going to execute a query that is responsible for bringing back the attendees. Now, if you want some help knowing how that will look, if you go back to PHP My Admin and click on the attendee table, then you will actually see that when they go to browse, they actually give you what the select statement looks like to get back everything inside of your database. And we can actually click on this create PHP code over to the right-hand side here, and they actually give you that inside of a variable. So I'm just going to copy this. So this isn't really necessary. It's just a guide, but it doesn't help. It doesn't hurt to have some help. The next thing we want to do is create a variable, and I'm going to call it result. And the value of result is going to be this. So remember, this is our object for our crud.php file, and the arrow operator to get the private variable that was declared here that is going to embody our connection to the database. So we're getting this db arrow operator, and then we're going to execute the query. So we just say this db query, and I'm going to pass in the actual query file or the actual query, which is in this variable called SQL. This function is going to just return whatever comes back in result. Okay, looking good so far. The next step is to start wiring up our view records page to actually show these records. Now, the most common way to show records is in a table. PHP and tables, they have a love affair. So the first thing we want to do is actually create a table that would kind of have all the columns that we need to see for any attendee. And we are going to write some code that is going to dynamically generate these rows for the attendees. So in other words, we are going to have a table. Some of it is going to be static, the design part, but then we want to dynamically generate a row for each attendee, because we don't want to manually sit down and write the HTML for each attendee. That's almost impossible if you have over 1,000 attendees. I'm going to quickly do a table tag. All right, so this is some basic HTML here, table. And then inside our table, we always have a tr tag. And I'm going to open and close it in 2 separate lines. And before you can have any column, you have to have a row. So that's just the pattern that HTML tables come in. So in the first tr tag, what we're going to have are table headers, because those will be like the titles for each column. So inside this tr tag, I'm going to have td. And I'm going to basically just replicate all of the columns from the database. So if I take a look at the table that is generated, this is actually just a table, all right? And then these are the column headings per column that is in the table. So of course, we don't want to print back first name with no space as it is in the database. So we can actually, putting our design hats on, put in readable or more user-friendly column headings inside of our HTML pages. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that for each column that's in the database. All right, so after finishing all of them, I realize I'm using TD. I should be using TH. So if you're using TD, I apologize, you should be using TH. So just change out all of the TDs into TH. All right, so TH means table header, whereas TD means table data. So for the headers, when you say TH, you automatically get like it stands out. All right, so TH has a different function from TD. And then I'm going to do up a sample row just to show what our data needs to look like. All right, so I've added a sample row. So I just created another row and I just put in some sample values just to show you what our table output is going to look like. So when I go back to my website and I view attendees, this is what it's going to look like. You're just going to see this table looking like this, but this doesn't look like a table at all. All right, it's not very attractive. And that is in part because I'm not using any Bootstrap classes. So I'm just going to head on over to Bootstrap, see what they have for tables. And you can find that by clicking content and tables. And then you see that in their code example, they have a class for tables called tables. So I'm just going to make reference to this class here. And I'm just going to add it to my existing table in my view records page, and then I'm going to refresh and watch the magic. All right, so now you'll see that it's now kind of justified from left to right, and we get a little line. So if you want it with more flair, you can always add your own CSS to it. And they actually have other options. So you can get a dark table if you want. You can get one where the table head is kind of defined. You can get stripes. You can get a whole bunch of things. So you can personalize it. You'd add on the other classes that you want and make it yours. But for now, we'll just satisfy with referencing table. All right, so I just realized I was one column short, so I just fixed it. And that's better. So at the end of the day, this is what our table needs to look like. But each row here would be the attendees' data. So back in our view records page, we're going to go ahead and declare a variable, and I'm going to call it R, or well, let's write it out, results. And the value of results is going to be whatever is returned from our get attendees function. So recall that we can always reference these functions by using our crud object, which is defined in our con file. So crud, once con is included on a page, we have access to this object. And once we have access to this object, we have access to every single function that is defined in that class. So I'm going to say crud arrow get attendees. So back to my view records, results is going to be equal to crud, and then my arrow operator, and then get attendees. So remember that this function is returning the values and the results from that SQL statement. With that done, we're going to start exploring how PHP helps us to dynamically generate HTML. So I'm going to remove my sample row, and I'm going to replace this block firstly with a PHP tag. And in this PHP tag, I'm going to write a while loop. So we're going to say while, and then a while loop takes some condition. I'm going to say r, which is an arbitrary value, is equal to result. So result is what, well, results is what we defined up here. So results, and I'm going to use my arrow operator and a keyword fetch. And then inside of this, I'm going to say PDO : fetch ASSOC. I guess that's association, short for association. So let me explain what's happening here. So this PHP block can be inserted into any body of HTML. Of course, you can't insert it without wrapping it in PHP. So I just inserted this PHP block inside of my table, and I'm creating a while loop where I am going to say, do this operation for each item inside of this collection. So when results comes back from this in line 8, when results comes back after getting all attendees, it's going to be like an array. It's going to have a bunch of results. So I'm saying for each thing that came back inside of this results variable, let R embody that value. So then we're going to say for each value we want to generate a row. So this while loop, well, of course, no while loop is complete without its quotation, its braces. So I'm going to use just the open brace here. And then you're going to see that this PHP block is now screaming because it's saying that the previous PHP block has incorrect code, but we'll fix that later on. So what I'm going to do just the same time is actually declare another PHP block. And this PHP block is going to have the sole purpose of closing this while loop. So I'm opening it in one and I'm closing it in another. And you can observe that the syntax now is at ease because it's saying, okay, all right, I see what you did there. You opened it in one PHP block and you close it in another PHP block. Now, this is really cool because remember that anything that's not PHP or inside of a PHP block is going to be HTML. So I'm saying that while this loop is running, I want to be doing something. And what I want to be doing is generating a TR. And I'm just going to open and close this TR. And every TR has TDs. So for each time or each record that I'm going to be getting back when I do this operation, I want to generate a new row in my table, and each row should have a TD. So I'm just going to duplicate the number of TDs I need, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I'm just going to duplicate this. And then each TD is supposed to have a value coming back from the database. So inside of the TD, I'm going to have to echo this value coming back from the database. And remember, the only way to get the value from the database is to use this R variable that we just defined. So once again, each time that the loop iterates, it's going to store a result from the set of results inside of R. And then through R, we can actually reference whatever value. But the only way to get that value in here is to put in a PHP block. And we have to echo the value from the variable. So we're going to echo, and we say $R. And then remember that this is going to be like an array. So this is an array of arrays because one, we're fetching all the results. So think of all the results coming back from the database as an array, or from the table as an array. And then each column formulates an entry into the array. So the same way we could have accessed data using our, and I'll just go back to success PHP, the same way the post variable allowed us to access each array subscript using the name, our R value here actually allows us to access each column's value using the name of the column as the subscript. So I'm just going to say R square bracket and in single quotations specify the column. So my column was actually attendance ID, or attendee ID actually. Attendee underscore ID. I can just double check with PHP my admin, and yes, it was attendee underscore ID. So each of these columns can be accessed through this arbitrary, this abstract value that we created, and it can be echoed wherever we want. So what we want to do is that for every record that is there, we want to echo whatever value was stored. So right now we only have one record, but by the end of this video, we should be able to add at least 2 more records, see them in the database and see them on this page. So I'm just going to repeat this treatment. I can just copy this code and I'm just going to paste it, and I'm going to write back the corresponding value per column header that I would have defined. So the next column header should be getting the first name value. So I'll just say first name, since that's the name of the column in the database. And I'm going to repeat that for each of the other columns that need data. So just to recap once again, what we've done is create a while loop, and inside the while loop, we're saying that for each time it iterates, we want to bring back the record in the form of a variable called R, and then we're going to print out the different subscripts from this R variable inside the different table data spaces per row. So when I make these changes and save and refresh, this is what my page looks like. And I'm seeing Mary's record, and well, we're going to fix the date of birth value situation here. And then we're seeing each thing, and we also need to address the fact that only 3 is coming back for specialty. So let's put our form to the test. So I'm just going to click on my navigation bar, home link to go back home. And then I'm going to put in Agnes Walters and see what happens when we submit her information to the database. So when I do all of this, fill out the form and click submit, I see that, okay, you have been registered. So we know that our database connection is working, and we're reprinting her values coming back from the post values. But then when I go to view attendees, I actually see her information newly added to the table because she is now in our database. So just to verify, I can go back to my database and click browse again, and then it will populate with her new record. So now we are inserting records and we're able to view them in our website. Now, there are 2 things that we need to fix. One, it's the date of birth. We notice that it's coming over as 00000, even though we clearly selected a date. And the second thing is specialty. So I'll start with specialty because then it kind of ties into what we're doing now. So the situation with specialties is that we have a table specifically designed for specialties. So if I go back to PHP My Admin, click on specialties, I'm going to see that I have at least one specialty. It has the ID 3 and database admin as a value. Now, yours may not be 3, yours may be 1, yours may be 2, it depends. All right, and you may have added more or you may have fewer. So I'm just going to insert as many specialties here in the database as I actually have in my drop-down list. So remember, to insert, all we really need to do is put in the name. And so just to remind myself, the specialties that we advertised were software developer, web administrator, and other. So I'm just going to go ahead and add these, and I can click go. All right. And then it's showing me the actual insert statement. So I'm just going to modify this insert statement and just enter other at the same time. Oh, it's saying that it already did it. So I'm just going to remove this, and I'm just going to use this same statement to do other. All right. So that's why reading is important, because it did it already and I almost did it again. So I'm just going to go ahead and click go, and one more row is inserted. So when I look in the specialties table, I now have all 4 of my specialties, and you notice that the IDs here are because, well, I'm jumping from 3 to 5 for whatever reason, it's skipping 4. But the point is, in your system, you might have different numbers than I do. So in my video where I would have hard coded the option value of 3, that is not the best way to do this, because we want to dynamically generate an option per specialty. So if you had 5 specialties, then you should be generating 5 options. I only have 4. If you had 10, then your experience or your user's experience shouldn't be tied to my own. So I'm going to write some code that is going to actually query my specialties table and generate the options per record in the table, as well as actually modifying, setting the value according to whatever ID it had in the database. So as usual, the first place I'm going to go, because I have a database operation to carry out, is crud. And I'm going to create a new function, public function, and I'm calling this one get specialties. And then get specialties is actually going to look very similar to get attendees, because all I want is all the specialties and all the columns. So I'm just going to copy this code, and I'm going to rephrase the SQL statement from attendee to specialties. So now that we have defined a function get specialties, we can go back to our index page and actually repeat similar steps where we have some variable called results, and we're going to call our function inside of our crud operator get specialties. Now we're going to modify our select control, where we're going to actually take out the hard-coded options, and we're going to repeat what we did with our while loop. So I'm going to declare a PHP block, and inside this PHP block, I'm going to say while some arbitrary value, and I'm calling it R once again, and then I'm going to say results arrow fetch, and that's PDO : fetch association, and then I'm going to open my curly brace, and then I'm going to just close it at the same time so that I don't forget. So that's very important, guys. Never forget to close your curly braces. Sometimes you may get carried away with the code and you really didn't remember to close it, and because of how much code happens in between, you don't realize, and you spend hours debugging over this. So it's good to just open and close at the same time. So what we want here is to actually generate an option tag for each row coming back from our specialties table. So I'm going to declare my option and close it. So I really only need to do one option because it's a template and it's just going to repeat it for each record, right? And then what I want in between option for the printed value is the PHP tag, where I'm going to echo R, and what I want to echo from R is the value in the column name. So that's what this option tag will look like. But there's one more thing. We also needed the value. So we need the value, which should be the same value as what would be in our database table. So the ID in the database is what the value should be. So I'm going to say value equals, and once again, I'm actually just going to declare, put quotation marks, but I have to use my PHP tag, and I'm going to have to echo R and whatever value is in ID. So let's look at this again. I'm generating an option tag for each of the results coming back, and each option tag is going to have as its value the ID coming back from the database, and printed to the screen for the user's eyes the name. So when I go and refresh my browser, I get an error here. They're saying that there's some undefined method, and I think I have a spelling error. So when I go back, yes, I have a spelling error. I said specialties, but it is specialties. All right. So when I go back and I refresh once again, all right, so after fixing that error, we see here where we still have our dropdown, we still have all of our options. And just to validate that these are now coming from the database, if I view page source, then look at the options being defined. Then, we actually see a debug issue and it's saying undefined index. So I think I may have referenced ID when it's specialty ID. So apologies. So I'll just go back and make that correction. So it's always good to view page source to see if there's anything kicking and screaming in the background. So it's specialty underscore ID, and there we have value equals 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So whatever the value is, whatever the ID is in the database, that is what is getting printed back as the value, and whatever the name is what we are seeing in the drop down box. So let's just validate that everything is going according to plan. So I'm just going to add another attendee. All right, so we're going to add Tom Hopkins. And now Tom is fully registered, and we see here that the ID value is being passed over. And when we view view attendees, then we still see this ID value. So to fix this ID value, we need to modify the select script so that we're getting back the name and not just the ID. So I'm going to go back to my crud file, and I'm going to modify this query that says get attendees. And I'm going to do what we call an inner join. So I'm going to say inner join, and I'm inner joining the specialties table on specialty underscore ID equals specialty underscore ID. And then because we have the same column name, what we have to do is actually give the tables what we call aliases. So I can call attendees A and specialties S. And then I'm going to say A dot specialty is equal to S dot specialty underscore ID. All right. So if you can just follow this along, if you need a better understanding of this, you can always check out my course on MySQL database development and mastery, and that will bring a lot of context as to what is happening here. But once we have relationships in a database, then we have to do what we call inner joins, where we're actually joining the data between the two tables on what they have in common. And if you remember, when we were setting up our database, we had specialty underscore ID as the primary key in the specialties table, and we have specialty underscore ID as a foreign key, which is why all we're seeing is the values that correspond with the IDs from the specialties table. So by doing this inner join, I'm now saying bring back all the details from both these tables and allow me to do with it as I wish. So for the display aspect, since I'm now getting back all of the columns from the attendee table and all of the columns from the specialties table, including the name, now what I can do is actually go back to my code, go back to my my view records page, and instead of referencing specialty ID, I can now reference name, because the name is a column that I now have access to. And then when I refresh this page, I'm now seeing all of the specialties that are associated with ID 3. So I'm going to go and add one more record just to drive the point home. And this one is going to be some bit of gibberish. And I'm going to change the area of expertise to website administrator and then submit. And here, once again, we're printing back just the value because we're looking at the post value, which is just the option value. But then when we view attendees, we'll see the actual name because we know that we're printing the name associated with that ID value 6. Now, the last thing that we want to change is the fact that the date of birth is giving us zeros. And I was mentioning that this is because of a date formatting issue. So in PHP, the date format needs to be YYYY, 4 Ys, 2 M's, and 2 D's. In other words, year, month, day. But then we know that the date picker, if we go back to our form, is really giving us in day or month, day, year, or day, month, year, or something else. All right. So what we need to do is tell the date picker to actually change the format to be PHP friendly. So I'm going to go back to my footer file and I'm going to find the function that invokes date picker, and I'm going to add to the attributes here. So I just press comma and write date format colon. And then I'm going to specify that the date format I want is YYYY. That's 4 Ys, 2 M's, and 2 D's. So once I've made that change, I can now go back and refresh my form. And if I take a look, if I select a date and I look at what is printed, I see, oh, all right. So it's actually YY. Sorry. So in JavaScript, the date formatting is a bit different. So it's YYMMDD. So let me refresh and do that again. And right, there we go. So it's YY to give us the 4 numerals. So it's kind of weird because in PHP it's YYYY. If you use Excel, it's YYYY, but in JavaScript, it's YY. So you just want to be cognizant of that. So I'm just going to enter another random record here just to see what this will turn out to be. And when I submit, everything went through well. We see here the date format is retained. And when I go to view attendees, we see here that we are actually seeing the date format because it's now saving it in a PHP friendly way. So that's it for how we go about selecting records and how we dynamically generate HTML based on what is in the database.